Now, Tom, your first night here, you're getting double duty because this is a lot of what I talked about during Wednesday conversation. We're in the Genesis prologue, so this should be a lot of review for you. So I'm going to ask you all the questions. You're going to know all the answers. So we're in the Genesis prologue, and the prologue is chapters 1 through 11, and we're in chapter 3. The Genesis prologue is designed to answer a question: how did the world come to be so messed up? Well, the first two chapters give us this picture of God actually creating everything in an ordered, life-giving, life-affirming way. And then in chapter 3, we started getting the first answer to the question, why is the world so screwed up? And that is the first rebellion that happens in chapter 3. It is a celestial rebellion because the serpent rebels against God, but it is also a terrestrial rebellion, meaning a human rebellion, because humanity decides that it's going to follow the serpent and do what the serpent wants, reach out and eat the fruit. So we've been going through, after they eat the forbidden fruit, God shows up to judge humanity, represented as this single man and this single woman. That's all of humanity. And we've been going through the curse language of the judgment here. So God comes along and he says, Adam, where are you? What have you done? Adam refuses accountability, and he says, the woman you put here with me, she's to blame. The woman blames the serpent. So God started with the serpent, started talking to the serpent, then he turned to the woman and then to the man. So the reason I structured it like this, and you'll see this a little bit clearer because I know it's not very big on screen tonight, but next week when it's on a PowerPoint sheet, I may make this a full sheet so that you can see it. This is everything that God is saying from the time he speaks to the serpent. But because he goes Adam, Eve, serpent, he works backwards, serpent, Eve, Adam in judgment. So this is Adam's judgment down here. But I wanted you to see the overlap visually on how this flows down. Cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. So he starts by speaking to the serpent and says, you wanted to be higher up, you will not be exalted, you will be brought low. And then while he's still talking to the serpent, he starts talking about the woman. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. So he's speaking to the serpent, but he's speaking about the woman. So there's overlap here in his words between the serpent and the woman. And he basically says to the serpent, you're going to be defeated by her seed. And we mentioned a little bit who the seed was. The seed is a both singular and plural term that could refer to a group of people, and it refers to Israel in the book of Genesis. It refers to Abraham individually. It refers to Isaac individually. It refers to Jacob. But it also refers to the 12 tribes, all the Israelites. Ultimately, it refers to the whole nation of Israel, and ultimately, by referring to the whole nation of Israel, it refers to Jesus, the singular seed. And because we're found in him, it can refer to us too, which is how Paul uses it in Romans 16, verse, I don't remember. The end of Romans 16, God will soon crush the serpent's head under your heels. So he seems to think that the seed is the church plural. So he's going from talking specifically to the serpent, talking to the serpent, but it involves the woman. And then he turns to the woman. He says, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. So it's words to the woman about her role as a mother. Those roles and blessings are not taken away. They are now frustrated so that she will still pursue it. She will still fulfill it, but it will be infinitely more difficult. And then she says something, God says something to the woman, but about the husband. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Words to the woman about her role towards her husband. Your role as a wife is now going to be very difficult because we talked about this battle of the sexes power dynamic. Desire is the word used here in a negative sense. It's the same word that God will say in chapter 4 to Cain, sin's crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. And so it's used exactly the same, desire and rule. Now, I'll point out something here that I didn't say last week because I hear this phrase, he will rule over you, used by modern interpreters, largely with a feminist hermeneutic, who will argue that a husband having authority over his wife is a result of the fall, this curse, and that God never actually intended it to be that way. And that what they will cite is that they will say he will rule over you means he will dominate, control, and demand. I could not find anything in the Hebrew of this verse to confirm that, because the word for rule here is the same word not only in Genesis 4 where he says you must rule over it, and it's a positive thing. Cain, you need to rule over your own sinful desires. You need to have self-mastery here. It's also the same word in chapter 1 where he tells the sun, moon, and stars that you're to govern or rule the day and the night, the seasons and the passing of time. And there's nothing negative about the sun and the moon and the stars having authority over the passage of time on earth. There's nothing negative in Genesis 4 about Cain having self-mastery. And I cannot find anything here about a husband ruling being inherently negative. Now, as we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, he can screw up and he can go way, way too far with his wife. Adam can do it with Eve. It is a weakness, but it is not an inherent part of the text on any level that I can see. So I do not think the interpretation of saying a husband having authority over his wife is the result of the fall. And that now, because we're Christians and we live in the age of grace, that's no longer necessary. Everybody's just equal. It doesn't work that way. As long as marriage is in place, and that will be until the dead are raised at Christ's return, this is the rule. Husbands have the highest responsibility, which is why when we get into Adam's judgment here, word for word, he has the longest judgment, even longer than the serpents, and actually more emphatic, because the climax of it is going to be said to Adam. The words to the man are about the land, the earth, the ground, all the same word in Hebrew. But they're also about struggle. We'll talk about that mental anguish that comes with it. And ultimately, death is now going to spread to everyone because this man, the head of the human race, decided that he was going to rebel against God. So, tonight, the big idea is this. The man, Adam is the Hebrew word for man, Adam is the highest authority of the human order. He is, therefore, the most responsible for the rebellion against God in Genesis 3. And as such, he faces the longest, harshest judgment in verses 17 through 19. Now, the serpent ultimately being defeated and everything, that's pretty harsh, and I don't want to take away from that or the ultimate victory of God promised in 3:15. I merely want to emphasize and say that because Adam was the most responsible human agent, he is the most judged in this capacity, in this story. And it's going to well up to say, if you're the highest authority in your home, as men, as husbands and fathers, the judgment starts with you. When God comes along and he calls your household to account, he starts with you. And if you're going to blame your wife for things the way Adam blamed his and whatnot, and say, well, it's her fault and stuff, and refuse accountability, you're going to get the worst consequences welling up out of your life. So let's talk about this. It says, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. I would say, but you will eat the plants of the field, would probably be a stronger idea. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. Now, The big thing to note that I've underlined here is that unlike the serpent, who is cursed, the serpent is cursed by God. Adam and humanity is not cursed by God. The ground is cursed. So in his mercy, God does not go as full on judgment and justice as he could. He says there's got to be consequences, but I just cursed the serpent. I could curse the woman, but I'm not. I could curse you, but I'm not. In fact, the word curse doesn't even come up in verse 16 with the woman. I think she's the deceived one. She gets the most grace in her judgment, but it's judgment nonetheless. Well, the man is the most responsible, so he gets grace, but he gets the least amount of it because he was the most responsible. As I've talked about, he is the king priest. He is the ruler of God's creation under God, and he is the priest guardian, and he has failed because he has listened to a voice above God. God spoke directly to the man in chapter 2, verse 17, telling him what not to do. Do not eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's the one law that governs the garden. If you want to go on experiencing God's good garden presence, all you have to do is not eat fruit from that tree there. You can have the fruit of the tree of life. You can have all the other fruits from every other tree, branch, and vine all throughout the garden. But the second you eat of that one, you're in trouble. So this statement in verse 17a, because you listen to the voice of your wife, is a statement that carries a very intense idea of something like, because you deliberately did what I told you not to do. And the problem is not the woman. She wasn't there when God gave this command. She's not held responsible the same way Adam was here. Because Adam listened to his wife, and he did that against God's expressed wishes. So God, I go and I explicitly tell Jared, do not talk at all. And he turns around and he tells Roger what I said, and in so doing, he screwed up because he did exactly what I told him not to say. And then Roger, I tell Jared, nobody here is allowed to talk. And then he turns and he tells Roger, okay, we're not allowed to talk. Well, okay, you kind of screwed that up. And now Roger's turning around, he's talking stuff. Well, you wouldn't be in as much trouble because you heard it secondhand, right? You were supposed to obey it and everything, but he was the one who was given the direct revelation from God. It's not hearsay because it was something that God said, but look, just going to the next slide. The woman was deceived, and she says that it's like the serpent deceived me, and this is why in 1 Timothy, which we've already talked about before, in a couple of other lessons, Paul says Adam was not the one who deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But the woman will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. So the woman's not wrong. The serpent deceived me, right? But Adam doesn't even have that excuse. Adam just flat out disobeys, which is why I call this the rebellion, because that's what Adam did. He knew he wasn't supposed to do it. He had direct revelation from God, and he did it anyways when he got the chance. Roger, question. Yes. The question for the recording is, was he given the command prior to the creation of Eve? Yes. He was given the command, then he starts naming the animals, then he takes a nap and he wakes up and his wife is there. That's the order of events in chapter 2. And because of that, that's part of the reason why he's held so responsible and she is not held as responsible as him. He has more authority than her. He was given more revelation than her, and he is held to a stricter standard than she was because she wasn't created when the command came out. So who told her the command? Adam. That's why she's a weaker target for the serpent in chapter 3. Because she wasn't, did God really say you can't eat of that? Well, no, we can eat of it. We can eat all the fruit we want. We just can't eat of that one, and we shouldn't touch it and stuff. So and as I said when we got to that point, the serpent is probing for weaknesses in her understanding of what she can and cannot do, so that he can exploit, deceive, and compel her to do it. So the question becomes, which voice do you listen to? And this is a great question for all of us to ask ourselves all the time. The man listens to his wife's voice above God's. The woman listens to the serpent. The serpent's just listening to himself. But the fundamental problem is that nobody's listening to God. And that's why we're under judgment. That's why we're living in a cursed world. We could have lived in a curse-less world. Revelation 22 says, 21 or 22, I forget which chapter, says there will be no more curse in the new heavens and the new earth. This curse will be relinquished. It will be done away. It will be done away with. I wasn't expecting the second one. I felt the first burp coming. There will be no more curse, but for now we're living under a curse because we fundamentally chose to rebel against God and refuse to listen to his voice. So, first off, listening to your wife, husbands, not a bad thing. Listening to your wife or anybody else when God has explicitly told you to do or not do something is going to be wrong. So that's the point here. Don't take the away from this that you shouldn't listen to your wife. Your wives are very, very smart and intelligent people, and you should listen to them as long as they don't lead you astray from God. Angie. Okay, so the question is, has God spoken directly to the woman at all prior to the serpent coming in Genesis 3? As far as the story is concerned, no. So we should just assume no. She gets all of her revelation and understanding through Adam. God is already playing out the notion of what he's going to do throughout the Bible. He speaks and communicates to one person, and he expects that person to communicate it out to others. He expects someone to do the work of sitting down and understanding his word, and then that person has to actually lead other people to understand. He doesn't renege on that or go back from it ever. It's a good question. Now, 17b says, "Curse is the ground." Why does God target the ground? The picture is a bit of a hint. If we remember back to the previous chapters, because these stories are building on one another, he made the vegetation and the plants out of the ground and out of the land. Now, one, there's no blessings on the plants. They're declared to be good, but humanity is blessed by God. Fill the earth, rule it, subdue it. So just like the woman, and God blessed humanity, said, fill the earth, multiply. Just like this, with the woman, God does not take back his blessings on humanity. They're still going to multiply, and they're still supposed to fill the earth, the ground, the land. So the land is cursed, but God is not taking back his gifts and his promises. However, Adam was created from the Adamah. The Adamah is the Hebrew word for ground, land. It's also eretz, that's another word. But this is the wordplay of chapter 2. When God bends down, he creates a man out of the dust of the earth, and he breathes into him the breath of life. It's not the general term for land, that's eretz. The author of Genesis 2 is telling us there's a connection between his origins and his purpose. He's created from the ground specifically because he's supposed to work everything else that comes from the ground. His domain, his place of authority is the earth, the land, and everything that's growing out and living on it, which also includes the animals, but the plants are a bit more direct as this part of the story. The animals come back into play. They've already come into play because he's naming them. They'll come back into play in a judgment sense after the flood, which is part of what we read earlier today in Wednesday Conversations. where the fear of humanity is placed on the animals. So the ground is targeted to say it's not going to cooperate with the man's desires and intentions because man has not cooperated with God's desires and intentions. So the good land is now cursed to produce one, vegetation and produce, meaning edible plants, which God has already blessed and is going to continue making available. But now the land is also going to produce thorns and thistles, which is just a Hebrew way of saying it's going to grow stuff that you can't eat. And that stuff is going to affect the stuff that you can eat. It's a simple turn of phrase. So it's not just going to produce good, it's all going to produce good and ill. Good and bad. And you're going to have to work through the painful toil just to get good. So he's now going to have to go through the process of producing thorns and thistles, bad, to produce good, life-affirming vegetation. If you want to feed your family, you're now going to have to struggle harder, produce less good, and produce more bad, just to make ends meet. The idea of painful toil is wordplay related to verse 16, where the woman will fulfill her purpose through the painful toil of pregnancy and labor, where God is basically communicating and telling humanity, the more you fulfill my blessings and multiply, the more I'm going to multiply the painful toil in childbearing. Now he's saying to the man, the more you fulfill my blessings and multiply across the land, the more I will multiply humanity's struggle with the land. Fill the earth, fill all the land, but know for certain, now the more you multiply, which is going to be a painful process, now you're going to multiply the pain of feeding more people. It's not going to be as easy as if you just listened to me and stayed within my presence in the garden. So the man's judgment, we could say, is related to struggling day to day to survive. The woman's judgment and toil, her struggle, is related to the survival of the species, generation to generation. This is a good broad way to perceive the struggle here. Again, as I've been phrasing as we've gone along, this is primarily man's judgment. It is not solely man's judgment. Women can still face day-to-day struggles, of course, and men can still feel the struggle to replicate, reproduce, and have generation to generation worth. That's still a perfectly possible thing. But primarily, men are going to struggle with day-to-day survival, and women are going to struggle with generation-to-generation survival. That's a general breakdown, and God's judgment is targeting those purposes behind the man and the woman's creation and their role in and for each other. Any questions on that? Yes. Thistles and thorns. Are they so the question is, are they about general problems or things with pointy things on it? Both. I see no reason it can't be both. It's ambiguous. It's an idiom, which means it's not a literal idea. For a farmer, it is a literal idea. For everything else, the metaphor expands upon farming. If you want to run a business, if you want to work really well in your job, you're going to not just produce good, you're going to produce bad. Your church is going to grow up, and you're going to get people in it who are going to be thorns in the church. They're going to be problems, and you're going to have to work through those problems. So it is literal in a certain sense, but it is also out of the literal, pointing to non-literal realities that we still live within. Anybody that's a pain in the butt is a thorn and a thistle in some sense, right? In our lives. And if you're trying to produce good character even in a church, you're going to get a lot of bad thorns and thistles in people that you just don't want help and can't help. The picture of the farming aspect is much more, you're going to get things you can't eat. It's going to, instead of producing only good that you could get in the garden, you're now going to get good and bad. and you're not going to be guaranteed that you're going to get more of one or the other. It's going to produce both, and you're going to have to struggle through it. And because of this struggle, God says, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food. Now, I mentioned this earlier. Do you remember what I said about this this afternoon, Tom? Sweat of your brow is a Hebrew idiom for what? We're talking idioms here tonight. Idiom is just a non-literal turn of phrase. It's like when you say it's raining cats and dogs. What do you mean? It's raining really hard. Yeah. Nobody thinks you're saying a literal thing. That's just a simple English idiom. This this could be literal. And the Hebrew is a very pictorial language, and they pick their pictures based on what is most visually available in their agrarian society. So it has a literal component for sure. But the idiom is not merely about the literal. It's not about sweating and hard work alone. It's about the fact that it's going to be a mental toil to survive now. You're going to, the sweat of your brow, the picture comes from doing the hard work, causing the sweat, and having to wipe it off and just thinking, man, is this worth it? Am I going to get the crop that I'm planting? Am I going to get the results that I'm working towards here? The mental toil is about more than just the physical work. It's going to take extra effort across our lifetimes to fulfill it, and it's not going to be guaranteed success for anyone now. It's intense focus, hard work. It will always be necessary to succeed. I would say in the garden, all of these things were necessary to succeed anyways, but there's not going to be the added emotional struggles, fears and anxieties, a bunch of what if ideas. And this is the male struggle for provision. What if I can't put food on the table? What if I can't buy my kids clothes? What if this? What if that? That mental toil associated with day-to-day provision. For the women, it was the same thing about the painful toil of child rearing. What if I can't have a baby? What if something happens to my kids? What if I can't be there for them? It's that same mental toil. But here, it's targeting the man's purpose of providing. Our modern culture doesn't want men to admit how much of a burden the responsibility of providing actually is. Men are often the ones who hide it from ourselves. We hide it from our wives. We hide it from our kids. We hide it from each other. We even try to hide it from ourselves, just how much we're straining to go through providing for our wife and kids, our families. There is okay, this was back in 2010, so this may be a little outdated. I don't know what the statistic was now. But in 2010, there was a survey that I believe the Pew Research did that said, ask men, married Christian men, how many of you feel a mental struggle to provide and are filled with like anxiety? Well, the word wasn't anxiety, but I don't remember what it was because it's been 15 years. And the answer was like 95% of men admitted on a survey that they felt the mental toil to provide day to day for their wives. And then underneath it, they had to answer, does your wife know this? Have you told your wife this? And out of the 95% of men that answered yes, they feel the toil, less than 10% of them had apparently at that point communicated it to their wives. So communicate, you stupid fool. Look, Becky said it best today. Men are idiots because we have a helper there. And maybe one of the reasons she thinks she has to take control is because she doesn't know how much it's actually bothering us. How much we actually do feel the pressure to provide. Even in a society that says, look, a real man doesn't admit that he has struggles. The stupid stoic idea that you can never emote or feel things. That's stupid. It doesn't work. Your wife is there to be communicated with. Communicate. Your friends, your brothers are there to be communicated with. Don't try to hide it from yourself. You feel this. You know you do. You're going to go on feeling it. Your wife may actually stop spending your money randomly if you talk with her about how much of a burden it is. I, and you're gonna have to fight through that. You're gonna have the fight. I so I remember I remember my dad surprising me one day. I'm in college, and I come home, and Dad's home from work. It's just a regular weekday, and I was like, "Mom's car's in the driveway. She's not at work." I was like, "How come she's not at work?" Oh, your sister got off of work early, so Mom came home from work early so that they could go shopping and spend all the money. I was like, "What are they shopping for?" It's like, "I don't know. I never know. They come home with stuff they don't need." And I look back on that conversation because he said a lot more, and he was kind of venting at that point. But he was really stressed about the fact that my mom and sister just randomly went out and spent stuff on his credit card. I know that they probably didn't need, and did he? They probably didn't take into account that on their day off, uh, that they're spending his money, but because I guarantee you, neither one of them was spending their own. Uh, I know that because I know them, and how much it was bothering him. But he also never really shared that with Mom. She was a bit of a she is a bit of a whiz with money. She knows how to work that, so it was never probably as bad as he was making out. Sorry, I don't. It worked out. Oh no, she's a whiz, and she knows how to work that the money. She knows how to work out the money situations in ways that I don't know that Dad ever really appreciated all that much. But I want to kind of use the last bit of our time here to talk a little bit about the male brain in the sense of duty versus self. Now, men are, of course, problem solvers. Women are the relational ones. They like to sit down and talk face to face. We are the problem solvers. We do things shoulder to shoulder. We don't want to turn and talk about it. And if we're going to talk about it, we want to be in the middle of doing something, right? We don't want to sit down, look the other guy in the eye, and I totally get that. In some of the hardest times when I was living in Colorado and after I moved to Gonzales, when I was going through stuff, my friends would say, "Let's just go on a hike," and we would go on a hike in single file, not looking at each other because you're on a hike, obviously, following the leader. But then the person would just talk, and that was how we communicated. It was shoulder to shoulder, so to speak. In that we're not women, we don't sit down and just discuss the problems. If you're calling me, you better have a purpose. I don't want to call to just chat on the phone, okay? And it's because the male brain is revolved revolves around duty. What's my duty? What's my responsibility? This is not a bad thing. However, we get to our so consumed by our duty that we neglect ourself in the process. Our need to communicate to others about what we're struggling with. We're told to hide it. We're almost expected to hide it in a lot of ways. And we buy into a lie called guy math. To talk about guy math, let us first talk about, because guy math is not as popular as the girl math. What is girl math? Have you heard this trend? Okay, this one might be new. When he dies? Okay, so I'm not sure I understand that, but all right. Girl math says something like, if I spend $50 to buy it now, I'm saving $5 because I bought it on sale. Did you need it? Who cares? If you wait next week, will you get more off? Shut up. The girl math checks out. You're not spending $50, you're saving $50, 40%. That's girl math, right? Every girl knows it. And that story about my mom and sister spending dad's money, I guarantee you it was girl math that I don't know anything about, all right? What is guy math? Guy math is related to our problem-solving intentions that says, I exist to solve problems. That is my duty as a man. As a provider, I need to solve problems. If I am solving my wife's problems, she just wants me to understand her feelings, which is stupid because she wouldn't have those feelings if we solved her problems, right? Look, if we're setting out to solve the problem, and then we solve your problem, and then we say we have a problem, you haven't solved the problem according to guy math. Because guy math says, I exist to solve your problem. I solve your problem, that's one problem solved. But if I admit that I have a problem, that's still one problem to solve. So you still have one problem. So what do men do? The same thing that women do with girl math. They say, I don't have a problem. I'm not spending $50, I'm saving 40%. Oh, it's not two problems that we need to talk about and solve, because I don't have a problem. It's one problem, your problem. Let me solve that problem. Nobody pay attention to my problems and the things that I'm bringing to the table in this marriage, in this household, in this relationship, with my kids, with my friends, towards myself, towards my God. Guy math tries to say, by solving other people's problems, I'm lowering the number of problems, and then doubling down on it by claiming you don't have any problems that need solving itself, that you're not a problem that on some level needs to be dealt with. The problem with that is that it's a complete and utter lie. But we all buy into it. We all pretend that we're not the problem. If women are pretending that spending the money is not the problem, and they put mental pressure on their husbands not to spend that much money, men exacerbate the problem by saying, oh, no, it's fine, whatever, and then just not actually talking about how much pressure they feel when they go out and spend needlessly. How much pressure they feel to provide, and when that money used for provision, in his mind, is going to go to specific things that need to be fixed around the house, around the car, the future of the kids. They're going to school, their college, they're all that stuff. And the money's just being spent on stuff that they don't perceive needs to be spent on. The mental anguish goes up, and then they double down on it by saying, oh, but it's whatever. I can't stop you. I can't solve a problem or anything. If you communicate with them and you talk with them about how much it's bothering you, their natural feminine caretaker kicks in, and they say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much it was bothering you, and they may not actually spend that kind of money. And it actually solves problems through this fancy thing they invented in the 60s called communication. So do not buy the guy math. Just don't do it. Admit that you have a problem. Admit that you're often a problem and that you view things as a problem, and that you need to work on solving not just other people's problems, but your own. You need to admit that to yourself and work on taking steps to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be just like Adam, who says, no, it's her fault. She did it. Blame her. If you want to get out of this cycle that Adam and Eve are now instituting, you have to start taking accountability. And for guys, this is a part of our taking accountability. Because the only other option is that you're just going to sweat it out. You're just going to share the mental anguish. And it's just going to pile up and pile up and pile up until it explodes out of you with all the anger and all the rage that your wife no longer feels safe. And then she institutes a divorce, because 70% of women in our culture institute divorce, because you kept it in way too long instead of actually dealing with the problems. Talking it out. At least initiating the conversations of saying, please don't go and spend $500 on this that we don't need. Spend $200 on the stuff that we do need. Agree to that, and then your wife is now accountable not to spend the money, and it helps your anguish, it helps your relationship, and it helps her be more self-controlled, right? So the mental anguish a man feels to provide for those under his care is going to be mirrored by the woman who feels the burden of the mental pressure to be a mother and raise children as well. So the reciprocal side of this is you need to listen to your wives and understand you need to help your sons and you understand this about their kids and stuff, that your wife feels this burden towards her kids, her grandkids, or their great grandkids, that they want to do things to be there for their children. And so the relationship between a man and a woman is designed to say, what can I do that frees you up to fulfill this? You want to fulfill your role as a mother? What can I do to help you towards that? As in your role as a mother, it would really help me as a provider if you didn't do this, if you didn't copiously spend the money on stuff we don't need, which means you're going to have to talk about and agree what do you need and what do you want, what's the difference between those things, and know that just because you want it doesn't mean you should go spend the money on it. And this will actually help uh, things play out. Now, next week we're going to finish this off. We're going to talk about this last phrase, until you return to the ground, for dust you are and to dust you will return. And then we will continue pulling all these threads together and trying to understand Genesis 3 in a broader sense, pull back from the details, and start putting some key theological ideas together. Any last questions? We got about 90 seconds left technically. All right, go forth and spread the word of guy math and call men to account away from it. And Angie, you can start doing the same thing with girl math, okay?